It's good to see everyone out tonight. I first want to thank the elders for giving me this opportunity to speak to you tonight and placing on me the responsibility and entrusting me with this privilege. Before I begin, I have a note from my wife. If you'll remember, her stepdad passed away just under 3 months ago, and so she wanted me to read this to you all. Dear Jordan Park family, sometimes bad things happen to good people. When I got the call that my stepdad had been killed at work, I prayed that there was some mistake, that I was in a nightmare, that maybe the doctors were mistaken. But our world was indeed turned upside down, and the man who chose to be my father was gone. The last few months have been a whirlwind of grief, lawyers praying, and people reaching out to us. And I wanted to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to those who sent me emails and texts and cards offering me your support. Thank you to those who drove 2 hours to give my family a hug during the most difficult time of my life thus far. Thank you to those who sent my mom freezer meals so I didn't have to worry about her eating while I was here. And thank you to those who donated money to help with my mom's bills. Thank you to everyone for your prayers. Even if I never knew you prayed for me, those prayers have kept me going, given me a peace I have never expected to find, and helped me lift my mother up when she was at her darkest. I ask that you continue to pray for my mom, for me, for my children, as well as we all forge a new path without a man whom we loved so dearly. And grief is odd in that it hits you at random times, and now that things are settling, that we miss him the most. Thank you again for all you've done. Your kindness will never be forgotten. Sincerely, Stephanie Griffin. So I'm going to speak on a subject that is very interesting to me and fascinating. I'm very much a nerd, so I love science and technology and all things related to those two things. And I want to talk about this notion of science as a belief system versus the Bible. You may remember this guy, Bill Nye, the Science Guy. He had a TV show back in the 1990s where he talked about all the different kinds of things related to science and biology and all kinds of really cool things. And he was really goofy, so I really liked the show. But lately, he's been injecting himself into the national dialogue on various topics, but most notably about evolution and the origin of the universe. And he's extremely zealous about the naturalistic worldview, which he refers to as just science. So if you don't have a naturalistic worldview, then you don't believe in science. So, well, what exactly qualifies this guy to be an expert? He has a bachelor's of mechanical engineering from 1977 from Cornell University. So, hi, Bryan Griffin. I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from 2003, University of Alabama in Huntsville. So, I guess I'm as qualified as he is to talk on this subject. He's made some very concerning statements, and sometimes you see these memes on the internet. You'll see this photo with this quote placed beside it, and sometimes if you check it out on Snopes, it didn't really happen. That person didn't really say what was said, and these things you can find all over the internet. Well, I actually watched the video in which he made this statement, so I know this one was correctly attributed. He had said in this video, I say to the grown-ups, if you want to deny evolution and live in your world that is completely inconsistent with everything we observe in the universe, that's fine, but don't make your kids do it because we need them. We need scientifically literate voters and taxpayers for the future. We need engineers, we need people who can build stuff and solve problems. And this is the sort of thing that we face today, and it's really nothing new. But it is preached, if you will, in our education system, in the mainstream media, news organizations, Hollywood, etc. So we're bombarded by this naturalistic worldview and treated as though because we don't buy into this worldview, then we don't believe in science. Well, the truth is, science and what we believe, the Bible teaches about the origin of the universe and mankind and all the living things we see around us, those two things are not in conflict. So, first of all, what is science? Well, it's a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. This is a definition gleaned from Wikipedia. So, stated further, back up. I think I'm missing a slide. So, stated further, in order and closely related meaning, science also refers to this body of knowledge itself. And I believe this is what folks like Bill Nye are referring to when they say science. And this body of knowledge itself of the type that can be rationally explained and reliably applied. So, scientists use what is called the scientific method. And the scientific method is a body of techniques for investigating phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, or correcting and integrating previous knowledge. To be termed scientific, a method of inquiry is commonly based on empirical or measurable, that's key, measurable evidence subject to specific principles of reasoning. And the Oxford English Dictionary defines the scientific method as a method or procedure that has characterized natural science since the 17th century, and consisting in systematic observation, measurement, and experiment in the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. So the truth is, the theory of evolution, for instance, is just that. It's a theory. Because we can never move past the point of just a hypothesis or postulate, because the types of mechanisms that are hypothesized by the evolutionists can never be observed. They can never be tested because of the fact that the events described are in the past. We can see evidence of them, but the amount of time needed to establish a theory as fact by observation and experimentation would literally take eons of time. So, another thing I want to talk about, the origin of the universe. But before we get to evolution, we have to talk about the origin of the universe. Well, it's kind of hard to see from this picture, but it just kind of looks like white noise. But this is a picture of everything we can see out in the universe. All these bodies are galaxies and stars and sources of radiation. And if you look at each of those points of light on this picture, each one of those points is moving from each other point, moving away. They're all moving away from each other. So if you imagine a balloon, and you blow it up a little bit, and then you use a marker and put dots on that balloon. And if you blow up the balloon further, if you watch those dots, every single dot gets further away from every single other dot. So what does this mean? It means that, in this case, the balloon is expanding. Well, this indicates to us that the universe is expanding. So if you go back in time far enough, you reverse it, they all get closer and closer and closer, and they all come to a single point if you go far back in time, far enough. Now, this, of course, is the basis for the Big Bang Theory, which hypothesizes that the universe, all matter, space, energy, and even time itself was created when a singularity whatever that is, expanded, and eventually formed the universe we observe today. Now, this is the basis for the scientist theory about the Big Bang. Well, this is also the basis for my personal belief that the universe was created by a supreme being that transcends time and the physical universe. Look at Psalm chapter 19. Now, being an engineer, I'm used to thinking of things in terms of cause and effect. When I have a mass, if I push on it with a force, that mass is going to accelerate. What also is going to happen is that mass is going to push back on me with the equal force. Sir Isaac Newton discovered this and formulated equations. Force equals mass times acceleration. So every effect that is measurable has a measurable cause, except when we talk about Big Bang. We talk about whatever the singularity is, a small entity the size of a proton that existed before it expanded. But what existed before that? Did it just appear spontaneously? Something, the universe, couldn't have come from nothing. Psalm chapter 19, verse 1. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run his course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the outer end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. For me, personally, it's a smaller leap of faith to believe that a transcendent being caused the universe and design all this incredibly complex life and organisms that we see around us, this order that we see in the universe. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I want to talk about a couple of different things, just small things that present big problems for the evolutionist and those that subscribe to the Big Bang Theory. Look at the probability of biogenesis, and that's just the creation of life by chance. Nobody knows, the scientist that subscribes to the evolutionary theory has no idea what this primordial soup that had all the building blocks for life that accidentally formed life, they have no idea what that's made of. So they make assumptions. They have guesses. They make math models. What is the probability of taking those building blocks and having something form by accident, by chance? And depending on how you set up your assumptions and how you set up this calculation, it can come out to any host of numbers. For instance, the evolutionist Harold Morowitz of Yale, and currently professor of biology and natural philosophy at George Mason University, he estimated the probability of the formation of the smallest and simplest organism to be 1 in 10 to the 340 millionth power. That's 10 with 340 million zeros behind it. We can't even fathom a number that big. A few years following his calculations, the late and renowned evolutionist Carl Sagan made his own estimation of the chance of life could evolve on any given single planet to 1 in 10 to the 202 billionth power. That's just unfathomable numbers. In comparison, the number of atoms in the observable universe is estimated to be about 10 to the 80th. So that gives you an idea of just how unlikely or improbable the formation of just a single entity is by accident. There was a French mathematician by the name of Emile Borel. He calculated that an event with a probability of less than 1 in 10 to the 45th can be reasonably considered to never occur. So let's look at something else that poses a problem. Mutations, genetic mutations. Assuming we get past this creation of life, it happens by these immeasurable odds. And so we have a living organism, or self-replicating cell. The mechanism, they say, that causes this cell to evolve is mutations in genetic material. So and then once these mutations happens, the natural selection, the forces of natural selection take over and select traits that are most suited for survival. So if you have this colony of cells, the first one happened, then it replicated, and then one of them mutates. Its genes mutate somehow, and now it has traits that are more suitable for survival. So this one's going to survive, and it'll replicate, and its traits will get passed on. And so that happens over eons and eons in time. Eventually you go from a single cell to a human being. So, the very first life form was the predecessor to all life on the earth, and there must be a mechanism by which additional information is added to the genetic code. Because if you look at something as simple like a bacterium, the E. coli bacterium, for instance, just has a single chromosome. Compared to the genetic makeup of a human, where we have 23 chromosomal pairs. So we have a lot more information in our genetic code than a single bacterium. So how do we go from so little information by chance and mutation to multiply that information? And oh, by the way, that information has to be useful. It has to be beneficial. Well, mutations alone cannot accomplish this. All they do is alter existing genes. And I've read explanations that try to refute this point, but what they end up saying is there are some mutations that are beneficial. So they say that you have a mutation, it's beneficial, now you have a new organism that has a new genetic makeup, it has a new trait that's beneficial, so you have new information created. Well, it's not really new, it's just different. It's different information. We haven't added to the volume of information. So there is no known mechanism that explains this. Even Richard Dawkins, one of the most zealous evangelists, if you will, for evolution, doesn't know what that mechanism is. Let's look at another problem. This one was very fascinating to me. This is an image taken by the Planck telescope. It's a European satellite, and this is a aggregate image of the entire universe and radiation received by that telescope. And what they found was, as expected, the fluctuations you can see a color scale. It goes from blue to bright red, and there's fluctuations in this picture. Well, the distribution, if you use a computer to calculate the actual distribution, it's random, as expected, over the whole universe. But what's not random is the amplitude, so the brightness of these points of radiation or light. So they were baffled by this. You can't really see it in this picture, but supposedly one side is brighter than the other. And they couldn't figure out why. I still don't know why, but they created these math models. They said maybe there's this big super mode. And think of it as a sine wave that goes across the universe as this massive fluctuation that's 93 billion light years wide could cause this type of lopsided nature in the amplitudes of what we're seeing in the universe. Well, that didn't work because it didn't account for variations in density, so they put two sine waves or supermodes over top of each other, and now the math models work. But for it to work, the influence has to be before the inflation of the Big Bang. So now we're creating math models based on what we're seeing, and we're now making assumptions that, okay, now we know stuff that's going on before the Big Bang because we created a math model to match what we see. If you understand that, then explain it to me, because I don't understand it either. So what I'm driving towards is this. Naturalism is a system of faith. I've never heard someone that subscribed to this worldview admit that, but that's what it comes down to. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 22. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. No matter how you slice it, a belief in the naturalistic only viewpoint is a belief that something came from nothing. Or at the very least, that everything came from something before this Big Bang, whatever that is, happened. Or that all matter is eternal. That something, whatever it is, can be observed, cannot be observed, can't be observed. We can only make assumptions based on what we see around us. But we're talking about something that's supposedly 13.82 billion years ago. And we believe in this because we made a math model that fits what we see from a telescope. Because these only things they can only be theorized, they can never be observed, it must be taken on faith that the current scientific theories are true. And unfortunately, discussions of alternative explanations and viewpoints, specifically creationism and or intelligent design, they're suppressed by the misapplication of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution in the schools, because this is seen as an establishment of religion. So the teachers can't talk about it. We're not allowed to talk about it in school. So my purpose tonight is to encourage us all to study to show ourselves approved. Be ready, because we're being assaulted on all sides with the wisdom of men, and that is hailed as absolute truth. We need not be afraid of reasoned discussion on these topics, because if you really drill down far enough, you find that both systems are based on faith. And as Christians, we're comfortable with that concept, right? We are comfortable with the concept of faith. We know that scientifically we cannot prove beyond all reasonable doubt using observations and experimentation that A plus B equals God. But we have faith based on what we see around us, as it says in this Romans passage, they're without excuse. If you're not a Christian, if you haven't put on Christ, if you haven't confessed his name and been baptized into his death to receive the forgiveness of your sins, you have that opportunity tonight. If you don't buy into this naturalistic viewpoint, if you believe what you read in Scripture, if you believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and you want to become a child of his, you can do that tonight. If you're already a Christian and you need to come forward and confess wrongs in your life, we stand ready to assist you. Please come forward as we stand and sing.